Welcome to another Microsoft Azure Stack workshop. This is offering Microsoft Azure Stack resources. My name is Mark Grimes and I will be presenting this session. We will look at specifically working with offers, plans, and quotas. And once again, I have some shortcuts. If you see I have a syntax I use, I always start with aka.ms/Azure Stack, and then we have /offer, /plan, and /quotas. Use those resources after the presentation for more in-depth details about how to create these and use these. First, let's start with talking about managing access to Azure and Azure Stack resources. For the next couple slides, we're going to make a comparison to public Azure to make an analogy for how things can work in Azure Stack. So the first question is, how do users in Azure get a subscription to begin with? And the answer is through the creation of offers, plans, and quotas. In Azure, this is what a user would see on the right-hand side when requesting a new subscription. There would be multiple offers, such as pay-as-you-go, developer support, standard support, Visual Studio Enterprise. When users sign up for Azure, they subscribe to an offer. So that's really what a subscription is. It's the net result of subscribing to an offer. Azure presents several other offers too, from enterprise agreements to pay-as-you-go, MSDN, trial, etc. There are lots of different flavors. With offers, quotas, and subscriptions in Azure, this right side of the screen is what we see in the Azure limits, which you can find at aka.ms/Azure limits. And notice that for each resource in Azure, there is a default limit and a maximum limit. So who sets these? Well, Microsoft does. But in Azure Stack, you're playing Microsoft, so you'll be setting those. So managing access to resources in Azure Stack. So the problem, how do you, as an Azure Stack operator, manage the resources a user can consume? And the answer is, through subscriptions and offers, you are the admin and you define the offers. Plus, you can empower resellers to sign up their own customers, and we'll talk about that later on with delegation. The picture on the right is what the user would see in Azure Stack in a tenant or user subscription if they had the ability to get a subscription. We can make options available in there. In other words, the options as we create through offers when the user clicks a subscription. We can also make them not available, but simply assign the offer to an organization. So in that case, we could have a special offer made for a particular group of people or an organization or a company, but no one else will see it. Because by default, it's important to note that if we make offers public, they are absolutely public, and everyone that has a subscription on your Azure Stack in the user or tenant space will be able to see those unless you make them and mark them private. We'll walk through that. Let's talk about managing access to Azure Stack resources now. In Azure Stack environments, as we said, you are the provider. You are playing Microsoft like we do in Azure. You define quotas, plans, and offers. You set quotas specific to each offer, just like on the previous slide that is showing the limits at aka.ms/Azure limits. Those are specified ranges of maximum and minimum redo. In Azure Stack environments, you are the provider. You define the quotas, plans, and offers. You set quotas specific to each offer. You define your business model. So again, in playing the role of Microsoft by owning and maintaining and managing an Azure stack, you set these offers as per the requirements of the needs of the users or per your business model. So let's walk through this. Like in Azure, an Azure Stack resources are provided by resource providers or RPs. And this means that out of the box, once an initial resource provider is installed, at time of consumptions, meters and quotas are stated. Like in Azure, in Azure Stack resource providers are provided by Like in Azure, in Azure Stack, resources are provided by resource providers. This means that out of the box, once an additional RP is installed, at time of consumption, meters and quotas are started to be measured. So in this example, we're looking at specific resource providers such as compute, storage, network, and app service. And then for each of these, we can set a quota. Quotas determine the upper limit to the resource a subscriber can consume. And we can have multiple quotas for each service you run. For example, here we have 2 quotas for compute. This allows you to increase the ability to deploy solutions in Azure Stack by granting users access to use more resources as they outgrow their original quota. You do not assign quota directly to the consumer. Plans contain one or more services, each with a quota. So think about it this way, where the quota says how much, the plan says what. What are we going to allow our users to consume? So in this example, we have one plan that contains compute, storage, and network. We have another plan that says increase compute quota. And then we have a third plan that says app services. And notice that in plan number 1, it can have a compute quota of small set, and then for storage, it can have a different storage quota, and network will have a different network quota. So we can match and pair these quotas with the various aspects of the resource providers in each and every plan. So let's put it all together. So finally, offers are what the users sign up for. Offers consist of at least a base plan and optionally one or more add-on plans, as you see in offer number 2. You can see at the left how you can have offers for IaaS only or form an IaaS and web offer by combining multiple plans. You can see how offers are consumed by single users or groups of users in the next slide. As we started to say earlier in the presentation, offers have 3 states. We talked about 2, public and private. Public means visible to users. So in that golden key button we saw earlier, if you are a user in a tenant/user space and we made the offer public, when you click that Get a Subscription button, you will see all of the public offers that have been created by the Azure Stack operator. Private are only visible to cloud administrators. So use this state when drafting the plan or offer, or if the cloud administrator wants to approve every subscription. And not only that, but it's another way to control who sees what and simply assign exactly what you've created an agreement for with those particular customers. So if I have a customer who has particular requirements and I'm going to set up an offer with special things in it that I don't want to offer to other people, I can then assign it to that user. Decommissioned. So this is not able to be subscribed. The cloud administrator can use decommissioned offers to prevent future subscriptions, but anyone that's using those offers will have those untouched. So if you decommission an offer and I had made a subscription, it will work perfectly fine, but no one else will be able to create a new subscription based upon that. Users obtain subscriptions. Each subscription is connected to one offer, and each user can have many subscriptions. A subscription is the first thing a user must obtain. A subscription is the first thing a user must obtain to be able to use Azure Stack. The subscription determines the amount of resources a user can consume. It's also the unit in which consumption is reported for billing. The end result is that the provider, whether it's a service provider or an enterprise admin, can control which resource a user can use and how much of them they can use. The usage is then tracked through subscriptions. Subscriptions connect users to offers. Each subscriber can have multiple subscriptions, but there is a one-to-one relation between subscriptions and offers. Multiple users can use the same subscription, and a user may consume from several subscriptions. So this is a caveat into making offers public. If I'm a customer and I have a user portal and I see that get a subscription button, there's nothing by default that will stop me from clicking get a subscription, get a subscription, get a subscription. Now, if that's okay and that's part of the agreement, you can do that. But again, if I want to limit and constrain what they get, I can make one offer, assign it to them, and we'll show how to do that in a little bit. And then that is all they get. They can't click the get a subscription button anymore. So flipping this table around, this is the customer-centric view of the same thing. So a subscription must map to just one offer. An offer contains one or more plans. A plan in an offer can be a base plan or an add-on plan that a subscriber can add later. The plans access services within a quota that limits how much of the resources that can be consumed, which are defined by the resource providers that either existed by default in Azure Stack or were added in later by the Azure Stack operator. Services are then metered, and then the usage is tracked through subscriptions. Once you have defined the services you would like to offer, we need to determine how much of each service we want to allow users to consume. To do this, you configure quotas. You can create the upper limits for quotas only. Keep in mind the amounts of each resource, such as storage and public IPs, that you have available in the environment to ensure that you do not exceed your capacity. A basic view of capacity within infrastructure can be reviewed by selecting Region Management in the Azure Stack Operator portal and drilling down through the local region, resource providers, and then selecting each resource provider. Note on the right-hand side also which of the quotas are configurable. Some of these resource providers are just inherent and needed for the system. So for example, the health resource provider is nothing that you put into an offer. That's to provide health of the overall system. Pretty much everything else in here though, compute, Key Vault, network storage, MySQL, SQL, and app service, those are things that either came with the system by default or we added them. While compute resource provider is in place when an Azure Stack is first installed, the images or operating system files are not there, so you have to add those to the marketplace. We'll cover that in another session. But the things that you would have to add after the fact would be the MySQL and the SQL and the app services. And those all have configurable quotas. Key Vault is something that users can consume and is there by default, but there are no configurable quotas. And the reason why, because the default quota is unlimited and it doesn't really consume many resources. So showing quotas, each resource provider can show its own quota. So this is an example of looking And the left-hand side, starting there, we create a new plan. We give it a display name, a resource name. We can use an existing resource group or create a new one. Again, as we've talked in previous sessions, in the ARM templates, every time we deploy anything in Azure or Azure Stack, it must go into a resource group. I like making one resource group to contain all the offers, plans, and quotas. It just, from an organization standpoint and in management, it keeps them all in one place. So that is kind of nice to do in the Azure Stack operator portal. We see that for the services, there was Microsoft Web and one other, but I can't see that unless it expand that out, which we see in the quotas because we see the SQL adapter, so that's the other one. And then as we expand the quotas page in the Blade, we can then either create a new quota or accept the default quota. The default quota is what we showed on earlier slide, and those are documented on the Azure Stack documentation. So when we create a brand new subscription quota, we give it a name. We say, does it have app service plans, unlimited or custom? Shared app service plans, unlimited or custom, give it a number. Dedicated app service plans, pricing SKUs, etc., and the consumption plan. So this is an example of quotas that we can set on the Microsoft.web. And taking the same view, expand out and looking at SQL quotas. So again, you see there are different options because SQL Server is different than app services. So it simply has a SQL quota name, maximum size of all databases, and maximum number of databases. And here are the slides that talk about the default values for IaaS quotas and storage. So the good thing to note here is what things can we configure on the quotas. We saw some examples in the last slide, but for compute, we have number of virtual machines, virtual machine cores, number of availability sets, number of virtual machine scale sets. For storage, maximum capacity, and total number of storage accounts. Now, if you've been around Azure for a while, or even if you're new, storage accounts are not as critical as they used to be before we had managed disks available in Azure Stack. Every virtual machine required a storage account, but now they don't, and by default, when we create a new virtual machine, it will use managed disk objects. So for most of your disks, you do not need storage accounts. Now, the exception that still exists in Azure Stack as well as in Azure is for your diagnostics. So while you will have managed disks as individual Azure Stack objects for your virtual machine, that is managed by the fabric. But for your diagnostic disk, you have to have a storage account. So you don't have to have a storage account for each and every machine. You may consider grouping those together, and the kind of a rule of thumb is about every couple dozen machines, you might want to have a storage account. But again, you can monitor that and check the size, and there's documentation about watching over your storage access. In the network quotas, again, this is a good note to observe what things that we can set limits on and what the default values are. So maximum public IPs. And the public IPs are actually, for the entire stack, are predefined based on your deployment worksheet. So whatever CIDR notation you use will determine how many possible public IPs. I will talk about a particular thing that you need to be aware of with public IPs, because there are some things that if you do actually require a complete reinstall, and we want to avoid those when possible. So in Azure Stack, if you add public IPs and then you see, you'll get a notification. As we talked about, the alerts are very simple and tell you what you need to know on another presentation. If you see you're running low on public IPs, you have the ability to add more public IPs. But let's say, for example, if you added a range and then for some reason you determined that you needed to use that range somewhere else in the organization, here's the important thing to note. This is one of those things you absolutely currently cannot delete those public IPs. In order to change that would be a complete reinstall. As simple as the thing it is, it's just the way it is, and you need to be aware of that. So when you set your IP ranges, set them carefully. I'd recommend to plan ahead, and maybe when you do your deployment worksheet, make that value a little bit larger for the number of possible IPs. And then possibly you won't have to worry about that later on down the road, but also make sure that that range, whether you define it now and or in the future by adding on more IPs, that you do not overlap or use a range that may potentially be needed by someone else. Other things in the quotas, maximum virtual networks, the number of virtual network gateways, network connections, load balancers, NICs, and network security groups. And on network security groups, this is an interesting one because some customers really get a little bit crazy with this, and they think that every single VM has to have a very unique network security group. And while you can do that and get really granular and do microsegmentation per the network card, well, we don't really recommend to do that, although you can. But our recommendation generally is to do network security groups on the subnet, so that your subnet, once you define a network security group, will span across multiple servers, for example, in the back-end range. So we have a front-end, middle tier, and back-end tier for databases. All the databases would be within a subnet, and we'd have one network security group to cover those all. So when it comes to network security groups, if you have hundreds of machines, you should advise your customer, if they're not already doing this, to have patterns that they're going to use for the network security groups. Locks and tags. You can apply a lock to an item so it cannot be accidentally deleted in the portal without first unlocking it. You can also apply a tag to an item in the portal, like a customer name for a subscription. It's a free-form key value paired, so you can enter, for example, customer/Contoso or expiry 24-September-2017. Another good example of using for tags could be for a product team or an application or some sort of cost center, where you could then query that tag and then leverage that for some external system. As we mentioned in another video, you can also use tags as a filter to apply policy. So it's simply metadata, but it can be consumed by other things to create additional results. The other thing to note about locks is there's two types of locks I wanted to bring up, is that we can have a do not delete or read only. So when you think about critical assets, particularly in the user subscription, where they may have storage accounts that have valuable information or hard disks, you can say do not delete. So for the accidental case where someone might try to kill a resource group, that can block all that. And locks can actually be applied at the same scoping levels as RBAC, or resource space access control. So we can apply locks at the entire subscription, and again, that can work in either the Azure Stack Operator portal, or and that would be for the default provider subscription, or we could do locks in user/tenant subscriptions for the entire subscription per resource group, or per tags, or per Azure resource. Like most things in Azure Resource Manager, the preferred methodology is typically to apply these things per resource group, because again, that's going to be your deployment methodology. In the example, we talked about deploying resources to a resource group, and then when you're done, you can clean it all up, and of course, we can add and remove tags to that as well. So putting it all together as a starting point. So in the interface, we have offers and plans, and we can see that in the administration. And this is the similar slide we had before. You create your plan, you got your quotas, create a new quota, put in the values that you want in these different fields for the maximum number of virtual machine cores, availability sets, etc. Then you create a plan. Now on this screen, I want to highlight in particular in the middle of the screen. So one thing, when I first started doing Azure Stack, I thought was an obvious thing to select, but it really isn't as obvious as you would think. The second from the bottom, the lightning bolt there says Microsoft subscriptions, and you kind of think, oh, we're doing an offer and that's used for a subscription, therefore I might need to use that. Well, as we'll see coming up in upcoming slide, that's used for a particular thing. So tuck that one back away when we talk about delegation. That's the only time you're ever going to really need that. So if I'm just making an offer that a user is going to subscribe to, or I grant that to them so that we designate them that offer and they can't click get an offer, in either case, we do not ever use the Microsoft subscriptions unless we're delegating to an SI or someone like that. But in this case, for the plan, we have a test plan. It again has to go into a resource group. We give it a name. We select the services. We check the boxes. Give the plan a name. Put it in a resource group. And again, like to keep these things all together. And then we select the quotas with that. Then when we create the offer, so in this case, we have the display name for the offer, the resource name, the resource group, and again, we're putting them all together because this is in the Azure Stack administration. You just see in the upper left-hand corner of the black box. And we can add one or more plans to the offer at the bottom of the screen there. This is that golden key that we showed earlier. So initiated by the user, on the left-hand side, they click Get a Subscription. If and only if the offers are public, will they see something and choose an offer. So in that name, just like in the earlier examples that we showed with Azure, you want to give it a name that makes sense. So if all my various entities or organizations are going to see these, we could call it free trial, or we could call it small, medium, large, whatever. But make it a descriptive name so they know what it is. And of course, you would have advertised and sold this to them and let them know what's contained within it. But a good user-friendly name is always good advice. This is the other use case we talked before. So let's go back to the slide here. If we have an offer that's public, they click Get a Subscription, they see it in here. But if we make an offer and make it private, it will not appear when you click the Get a Subscription in the user portal. And again, in the upper left-hand corner on the left, notice that it says Microsoft Azure Stack. It does not say administration. So we know we're not in the Azure Stack operator portal. We're in the user/tenant space here. So if we make the offer private, it will not show up here, but we do this here. So this is called initiated by an admin subscription. And you see it in user subscriptions. So it's interesting when you're in the portal, if you're not doing this little tip and trick, I highly recommend. So on the left-hand side, when you see your resources, you see the resource groups, plans, offers, more services. We can click little gold stars and make things appear in there. The easiest way to find things is go on the top and just say search resources. So if you type the word subscriptions in the administration portal, again, notice in the upper left-hand corner, it says Microsoft Azure Stack Administration. If we type subscriptions in the administration portal, we'll see two different things. We will see subscriptions, and then notice at the top of the black box in white, it says user subscriptions. The difference is in the administration portal, the subscriptions icon will show the subscriptions for the Azure Stack operator portal. Now, I don't have it in this screenshot here, but I want to make this very clear. In the subscriptions in the Azure Stack Operator portal, there are 3 by default. 2 of them are for future use. I don't think they've gone away yet, but you do not need them, do not use them, do not grant anyone else access to them. If you are an owner of a subscription and you were the global administrator that set this up, you will have access and see all 3 of those. But when you grant access through role-based access control to the Azure Stack Administration portal to do things like creating offers, plans, and quotas, for the most case, you mainly only need to give people contributor to the default provider subscription. Do not grant access anywhere else unless we get to a subsequent patch and update process for Azure Stack, and it says now we're going to use these other 2 subscriptions. So a little side note there, but kind of an important one to note. In the administration in Azure Stack Operator, we use the default provider subscription. But the user subscriptions, what's going to happen here is, back to the other slide again. So if a user in the tenant space clicks Get a Subscription, and other organizations click Get a Subscription, those will appear here. Now, what's interesting, even though I'll see the list of subscriptions, If I didn't do this process, which is initiated by an admin, in other words, they click the get a subscription button, I will not have access into those. I cannot log into those unless they explicitly grant me access. So I've talked about in some of the videos about a scenario where maybe initially I, as an Azure Stack operator, want to get into those user subscriptions and help set them up. If we do the get a subscription, they got to grant me access, then I can go in. But another approach could be, this is one option here, I can say add a user subscription. I could actually add myself in. I then go into that subscription. I can log into the portal and I can set up and configure everything. And then I, as the owner, RBAC role for that subscription, could then add in the other users. So a couple different use cases in here, but my like about this is that if I make something I don't want other organizations to see, and or I don't want an organization to keep on clicking get a subscription, get a subscription, get a subscription, I can give them this once, it's over and it's done. No one else sees it and they can't click get a subscription anymore. Why? Because that offer was made private. So a couple considerations there. So to do this, we click add. And as you walk through it, you see it wasn't anything private there. It looks like I blacked it out, but I made an M&M subscription. And so we say new user subscription, give it a display name here, demo user subscription. And there was my live account. So I was granting it to that. And then I selected the QF860 offer. And then I selected a directory tenant associated with that. So that account had to live in that tenant. And then what's going to happen is that with that account, that Mark account in live.com would then log into the user portal and boom, just have complete access to that. Now, still back on the administration side, what I see here is I see the user subscriptions. We see a subscription ID. We see the states enabled. We see the offer that is associated with and the parent subscription. But and if I didn't do this myself and I gave this to someone else, I can't get in there and do anything else. But we can see them, and I can suspend or delete that. But if I do, I kill a lot of resources. So of course, it's not something we want to do or take lightly. For subscription management, we can leverage PowerShell modules to enable or disable user subscriptions also. So here's an example. So we create a variable for subscription, get AZS user subscription, and we set the state of that subscription to disabled. And then we run the set-AZS user subscription command. So here is the example we were talking before earlier when we had the slide. Let's kind of go back in time here to the provider delegation. And I can't find the slide. Delete that part. Here's the scenario with provider delegation, where when we were looking at the various resource providers to add in, and I mentioned about there's one called subscription, and we only use it for this case. This is the case where we do that. So let's take a look at how this works. Reselling through a delegated provider. So it's kind of a three-tiered hierarchy. So at the top on the right-hand side, we have the service administrator. I have an Azure Stack. I'm the service administrator. I run and do this. I then, as maybe a CSP or cloud service provider, have other SIs or systems integrators that work underneath me, and they are then going to sell services on behalf of me. So I want to create this hierarchy where I delegate out abilities to the SIs who then delegate offers to their users. Okay. So here's kind of the various roles that are part of the delegation. So the Azure Stack operator manages the Azure Stack infrastructure and creates an offer template. The offer operator delegates others to provide offers to their users. The delegated Azure Stack operators are users with owner or contributor rights in the subscriptions called delegated providers. You can name it whatever you want, but that's a good way to call it what it is so you can remember. They can belong to other organizations such as other Azure Active Directory or Azure AD tenants. The delegated provider selects which offerings to make available to the customer, onboards customers, bills customers, and then finally users. They sign up for offers and use them for managing their workloads, to create VMs, store data, and so on. So this is a little bit more walkthrough of the process, which is on docs for Azure, for the Azure Stack documentation, and tells you how this works. So first we create the delegated provider. The service admin creates an offer that includes the subscriptions service, as we mentioned earlier. Number two, they subscribe the delegated provider to this offer. And then create offers and enable delegated providers to sign up users. The service admin creates the offer that the delegated providers will resell and delegates it to the delegated provider. The delegated provider then creates offers using the delegated offer as the template. And then finally, the delegated provider's customers sign up for the offer via the delegated provider's branded portal. So now let's talk a little bit about automation of this, because if we're doing this more than once, which we most likely are for offers, plans, and quotas, we want to automate this. So there's some things that we can do. So leveraging PowerShell for backup of the settings in here, and also rapid redeployment or deployment of new offers, plans, and quotas. We can do this with the Azure Stack subscription administrator modules, and there's quotas, a respective module as well. So the latest version in PowerShell has these commands at the bottom for add, remove, AZS plan to offer, set new, remove, AZS offer, get metrics, offer delegation, remove plans, get metrics, remove the subscription plan as well. So whenever you can do anything with ARM templates or PowerShell, we want to script this out. There's a whole nother module we'll talk about backup. Backup has certain things it does from an infrastructure backup, but many things are not. So any of the things that you add after the fact, it's always best to have those scripted, even if you only do it once. So if you ever have to redo it for whatever reason on an existing system, or later on down the road you get additional systems, now you can just take those PowerShell templates or ARM templates and create parameters or variables which you would change to adjust for the new Azure Stack integrated system. And that will make the deployment go that much easier. So there you have it, folks. This is Offers, Plans, and Quotas in the Azure Stack workshops. My name is Mark from Microsoft. I want to thank you very much. Have a great day.